If you think you already know how the story of ice and fire ends, guess again, because the winds of winter are blowing. The Iron Men had penetrated even to the sheltered waters of Whispering Sound. Come morning, as the cinnamon wind continued toward Oldtown, she began to bump up against corpses drifting down to sea. Some of the bodies carried complements of crows who rose into the air, complaining noisily when the swan ship disturbed their grotesquely swollen rafts. Scorched fields and burned villages appeared on the banks, and the shallows and sandbars were strewn with shattered ships. Mercanters and fishing boats were the most common, but they saw abandoned longships too, and the wreckage of two big dromons. One had been burned down to the waterline, whilst the other had a gaping splintered hole in her side where her hull had been rammed. "Battle here," said Zondo. "Not so long." Who would be so mad as to raid this close to Oldtown? Zondo pointed at a half-sunken longship in the shallows. The remnants of a banner drooped from her stern, smoke-stained and ragged. The charge was one Sam had never seen before, a red eye with a black pupil beneath a black iron crown supported by two crows.
And as you can see, Euron is up to no good out there on Whispering Sound, getting ready to attack Oldtown. Clearly this is a big sea battle that the Winds of Winter is going to be serving up our way. So I am LML, and I'm here with Quinn from Quinn's Ideas and Baal the Bard from the Dragon's Reign. Thanks for joining us today. And we're here to talk about Euron, creepy Euron, with his one black eye, sailing a sea of blood.
So it seems like he's already done some pretty significant damage, but it seems like he's just getting started.
Yeah, and the High Towers are, as we've seen, they're sort of getting their forces ready, so all the big navies, they haven't really come to battle yet, but it seems like we're going to get a good sea battle there.
For sure. So Euron's fleet has been attacking all along the west coast on the way to Oldtown and is now very close, right? He might attack the city or simply seal off the bay, but it seems like a sea battle is definitely about to happen. All right, so Euron is taking Folly Flowers captive, also Aaron Damphair, various priests, magicians, and holy men to use for some sort of blood ritual.
You know, warlocks, mages, basically anything he can collect. So
any kind of magical bloodline or magical power he can get his hands on, he's got it.
So it involves like tying them to the prows of the ship for some reason. And so Euron seems to have these extreme delusions of becoming a god. And this is from the Forsaken chapter in the Winds of Winter.
Yeah, this is definitely more than just cruel and unusual punishment. He's definitely up to something here, so take a listen.
When he laughed, his face sloughed off, and the priest saw that it was not Yuri, but Euron, the smiling eye hidden. He showed the world his blood eye now, dark and terrible. Clad head to heel in scale as dark as onyx, he sat upon a mound of blackened skulls, as dwarves capered round his feet and a forest burned behind him. "The bleeding star bespoke the end," he said to Euron. "These are the days when the world shall be broken and remade. A new god shall be born from the graves and charnel pits." Then Euron lifted a great horn to his lips and blew, and dragons and krakens and sphinxes came to his command to bow before him. "Kneel, brother," the crow's eye commanded. "I am your king. I am your god. Worship me, and I will raise you up to be my priest. Never. No godless man may sit the sea stone chair. Why would I want that hard black rock? Brother, look again, and see where I am seated." Aaron Damphair looked. The mound of skulls was gone. Now it was metal underneath the crow's eye. A great tall twisted seat of razor-sharp iron barbs and blades and broken swords, all dripping blood. Impaled upon the longer spikes were the bodies of the gods. The maiden was there, and the father, and the mother, the warrior, and the crone, even the stranger. They hung side by side with all manner of queer foreign gods. The great shepherd and the black goat, the three-headed trios and the pale-chowed Bacalon, the lord of light and the butterfly god of Noth. And there, swollen and green, half devoured by crabs, the drowned god festered with the rest, seawater dripping from his hair.
So the big question is, what is he doing with all this blood magic?
Baal the Bard, what do you think?
There are a lot of different options. He could be summoning Krakens of some kind. We know that blood magic sacrifice can do a lot of things in this universe, so why not summon a Kraken? Could it be a part of summoning dragons? We know the Dragonbinder horn is necessary, but I mean, maybe he wants some kind of stronger magical tie over the dragons, and maybe killing people gets him there?
Well, if he's got to maybe call the dragon back to Westeros and wrest it from Victarion's control, perhaps blood magic is a part of that. Probably the most likely option would be some sort of storm, right, Quinn?
Yeah, some kind of supernatural storm that he could create while he's attacking Oldtown and just make it more difficult for them.
I mean, we know from the world that it makes sense because we know from the world that Melisandre has already killed people in order to gain control over the winds. So if she's burning people and that gives her power over the wind, then why not, some kind of sacrifice on the prow of your ship, giving you control over more than the wind?
And he's got holy men with holy blood, as he points out specifically.
So that makes me wonder, could he be up to something other than just wind? Could it be some sort of like nightmare storm or...
Well, like in the Fire and Blood book, when they encounter the messed up storm and they think they see a kraken, and it's almost like this supernatural storm that even Sir Eustace had never even seen anything like that before.
That's a good, that could be George laying some seeds there, some groundwork.
Yeah, that's a really good parallel.
So yeah, we could see some sort of infernal hellstorm. That would be
Oh, isn't it in when Tyrion sees the blood moon hovering over the water? That's right before, or is that right after that big crazy storm that they have near Slaver's Bay?
That is when I think they're sailing by Valyria, and the storm would be some point after that, but...
So even there you've got this idea of like this crazy unnatural storm, and it's, messing with everything, and...
Well, that's where... Well, what's interesting is that Mokoro sees Euron in that vision with the title of our episode, One Black Eye in a Sea of Blood, like right before that storm happens or right during that storm. So, I mean, that storm itself might even be suspect for all we know.
And don't they throw people overboard?
They try a few different things, but yeah, if I'm not... I mean, the Ironborn are always throwing people overboard.
Well, I thought there was some mention of like a very specific sacrifice that they made of like a couple of women that they threw overboard. I can't remember if it was Victarion or maybe it's something from the World of Ice and Fire. Or Fire and
Victarion
Blood.
sacrifices a bunch of pleasure boys.
Yes, that's what it is.
They throw them in the sea.
They throw them in the sea?
And they put the girls on a ship and light them on fire,
That's what it was.
correctly.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's in Slaver's Bay that they do that. So that's actually in the Victorian T-Wow chapter. So in any case, he's up to something bad with the blood magic. It could be, it could be all kinds of things, but all of them are bad. And this seems like something that is pointed towards the specific battle at Oldtown.
Yeah.
So like this won't be the first blood magic ritual that Euron tries before the story's over. So next question is, why is Euron attacking Oldtown?
There must be something there that he wants. I mean, some magical knowledge that he is yet to possess. That's like the final key to what he's trying to do, his apotheosis, becoming a god.
There's books, there's glass candles.
Maybe other magical objects that we don't know about.
Other magical objects, and that's the category that interests me because as a writer, the Citadel is a treasure box that George has created. He could put pretty much any damn thing in the Citadel and be like, yes, that's what Euron was coming for.
Right, and you've already got Melora Hightower and her dad up in that tower doing some kind of magical shit. They're already...
Book of Spells.
Yeah.
And that one was so interesting, we dedicated a whole topic to that one, so yeah. So in that Damphair T-Wow chapter, known as the Forsaken, there's part of the dream where Krakens, Sphinxes, and dragons came to Euron when he blew his dream horn. So could that be one of those things where there's specific meanings for each word? So Krakens, that would be the Greyjoy fleet. Dragons, Dany, and Sphinxes could refer to Oldtown because famously there are those two big Sphinxes outside of Oldtown. The first two are obvious, Krakens and dragons, but what would the Sphinxes be? And he's poised outside Oldtown. So that tells you that Oldtown could be a really important piece of the puzzle for him.
Could it be Dorne? Because we have Alaras
The Sphinx.
at Oldtown, who is the Sphinx.
I didn't think about that.
And Alaras is Dornish, one of the, very, very likely Sorella Sand, one of the Sand Snakes.
Well, we'll have to keep an eye on that because that's one of the questions we're asking ourselves is of all the characters that we have in Oldtown, could some of them interact with Euron? Obviously, Sam was the first one we thought about, but...
I mean, regardless of who it is, I think what it means is that by way of magic, they'll come under Euron's control. Or that Euron will get the upper hand. He's going to blow his magic horn and he'll get the upper hand.
Yeah, and I'm just interested in the idea that Sphinxes, if Oldtown's in that list, that just means it's really important. So there's all kinds of ideas what he might do if he can climb to the top of that high tower and do some magic up there. Starts to look like Saruman. There's a lot of sort of Palantir symbolism going on there. So maybe he's going to go up there and work an even more evil spell. Another question is, could he be waiting for Dany?
In Oldtown. I could see him potentially waiting, but I could also see him maybe even showing up in Slaver's Bay, potentially.
Yeah, he could show up in Slaver's Bay. I think those are the best two possibilities, is that he shows up in Slaver's Bay, or he just takes Oldtown as like a capital and has his base of operations. Because it used to be the capital of Westeros before King's Landing, for far longer than King's Landing was. And I guess I shouldn't say capital because Westeros wasn't a unified thing, but it was the most prominent city, the center of learning and culture. It's where Aegon had to go to get officially coronated, that would be recognized by everyone. So for all intents and purposes, it was kind of like a capital. But
Yeah.
So I guess the next question to ask is like, what is Euron intending? What's his big picture? What's his goal? Why would he be doing all this blood magic and attacking Oldtown anyway?
right, because Oldtown clearly isn't his end goal.
No.
Well, I think there's a big hint to that in the Forsaken chapter when he says, "These are the days when the world shall be broken and remade. A new god shall be born from the graves and charnel pits." He's talking about himself, obviously. So create chaos, and I rise up out of that as a god or somebody that's worthy of worship.
So he's using chaos as a ladder, or
Exactly.
chaos realms as a ladder, as it happens. So as we said, he's kind of meddling with forces he doesn't understand. So this could definitely backfire. Whatever he's intending is probably not what he's going to get. So
Yeah.
what he intends is only even one half of the question, but it kind of tells. I mean, has something along the lines of becoming a god. We know that.
So
But-
it's very like Lovecraftian. Like he'll look into the abyss potentially, and it'll destroy his mind, destroy his essence.
That would be a satisfying end, is Euron like gibbering in the corner, just like, we'll see. But anyways, there's also the Night King possibility that he actually intends to take control of the others somehow. That could be an accidental outcome, but it could be an intentional outcome.
I mean, he seems to be looking for something in the idea of ruling over the army of the dead that would sweep the world. You know, like you were saying, like it's from the graves and charnel pits. Like that's kind of Night King language. Like he wants to rule the dead, and from the dead rise again to rule the world. That sounds very Night King like.
Yeah, and all
He's sitting on a mound of skulls in one of the visions as well.
and all that rising harder and stronger stuff suddenly is going to seem like very heavy foreshadowing if that were to happen. So
Oh, absolutely. Especially with them drowning in, if he's going to have some kind of big unnatural storm and Oldtown is a port, the idea of like drowning the entire port and then rising an army of the dead out of it would be very, very much within like both like a combination of Night King mythology and Ironborn myth would be that idea of like drowning the whole thing and then raising them up from the dead.
And they talk about Lord Leighton. Well, maybe he'll raise an army from the deeps. And we were thinking Merlings and deep ones, but maybe it's an army of corpses, like you were saying. That would be a freaky twist on that. Speaking of freaky twists, we know that he ostensibly wants to marry Dany, but one wonders, does he just want to marry Dany, or does he want to, like, say, Nissa her, or use her for blood magic like he did Falia? Or like he's going to.
Right, or like make some kind of magical baby with her specifically in order to have, to
That he
maybe
can then
even
use for blood
yeah,
magic.
that he can then use for blood
I
magic.
lean towards that because of what he says to Victarion. He says, to make an heir that's worthy of him, I need a different woman. And he's saying him, referring to himself in the future once he's reached that point of ascension.
There's all kinds of dark intent that could be there. And one wonders if Dany will be temporarily under Euron's power or influence. I mean, it might not even need to be a spell kind of a thing, because Dany's looking for allies. We already talked about how the Ironborn fleet is obviously brought to Meereen to bring her back. So she's going to come back to Westeros in some sort of alliance with the Ironborn, most likely. So she's going to be receptive to King Euron at first. And Euron kind of knows how to tone down the crazy. I can see him playing it straight, for like a little bit.
Yeah.
Right.
That's why she needs Tyrion to be like, yeah, don't trust
That
this
guy's crazy.
Yeah, because there are two things that are a piece of that. One, Euron could potentially offer her knowledge of dragons. He's supposedly been to Valyria, whether we believe him or not. She might be willing to believe him that he's been to Valyria and has some kind of insider knowledge about dragons, especially if he's in charge of Oldtown, and may be able to say, like, oh no, the tower burned, but I just so happen to have this book that might be useful.
Yeah, he's got a little bit of a Dario vibe. He's got a Valyrian steel suit of armor, so...
Well, not just Dario. I've theorized that if you take Dario and you take his Dar and you mush them together, then you basically have Euron as the Night King
explain
figure.
that. Explain that.
So Dario is he's not a pirate. He's the lord of the the free company, but he's got the swagger and the charm
and the flamboyant dress
and kind of the bad boy vibe that Dany seems kind of into, and Euron has that. But his Dar, so Dany has her dream where she makes love to his Dar, and he has like a icy blue dick, and he also has blue lips, which can mean cold, but also when you drink a lot of Shade of the Evening, it turns your lips
bruised
blue.
and blue is the exact phrase used there. Yeah.
Right, and that's what, Euron has his blue lips from drinking Shade of the Evening. So if you take the symbolism from his Dar in that dream, which is like a Night King, the icy dick and like cold frozen mouth, and you combine it with like the flamboyant Dario character, you
basically get Euron. Blue lips and swagger, and so definitely Euron. Dany is going to be an interesting thing to watch for. It's probably not even going to happen in this book, which is why we didn't even make it a dedicated plot line, but just discussing it as more of like, what are Euron's future plans? Because this is probably going to be a final book thing. But it is definitely going to be a big part of the climax. So
Absolutely.
All right, so we've got a couple of different kinds of foreshadowing and literary parallelism that seem to point to interesting things for Euron. So let's start off with the idea of Oldtown being attacked. All right, it's been attacked a few times, once by a great Ironborn king, and another time by somebody named Samwell, which is kind of interesting. And so the quote from the World of Ice and Fire, it says, "In one century, the city was sacked by Samwell the Starfire, Korad the Cruel, and Giles the Woe, who's a gardener." And so you've got Samwell, and we've got a Samwell at Oldtown, and then we have an Ironborn king. So that's just kind of an interesting parallel. The idea that Euron is going to sack Oldtown, would be a repeat of history there. And then there is another one going all the way back to the very oldest era of Oldtown about the Isle of Ravens and a pirate lord.
They did not need a boat to reach the Isle of Ravens. A weathered wooden drawbridge linked it to the eastern bank. The Ravenry is the oldest building at the Citadel, Alaris told him, as they crossed over the slow-flowing waters of the Honey Wine. In the Age of Heroes, it was supposedly the stronghold of a pirate lord who sat here robbing ships as they came down the river.
So, there you have it. We've got a pirate lord making his stronghold at Oldtown. I mean, that Euron is a pirate lord. He'd be hanging out at Oldtown. Seems to make sense.
Yeah,
History repeating itself.
Totally. And I've connected that pirate lord story potentially to Azor Ahai and the Great Empire of the Dawn people, because they would have been overseas lords that came and sort of conquered and ruled from the islands. The Fewstone Fortress is at Battle Isle, but Isle of Ravens is just another isle in the same sound there. And then if you go over to the Long Night parallels, lots of people have picked up on Euron as a Bloodstone Emperor parallel, right? Mm-hmm. So I just mentioned the Fewstone Fortress at Battle Isle. That actually leads us to some of the Long Night parallels that are going on here. And we'll pull some of this from the World of Ice and Fire.
Archmaester Periston has put forward a different, more plausible speculation suggesting that the Valyrians had in ancient days reached as far as Oldtown, but suffered some great reverse or tragedy that caused them to shun all of Westeros thereafter.
So we won't go into the entire Great Empire of the Dawn theory here, but this Fewstone Fortress is kind of the smoking gun piece of evidence. Fewstone can only be made by Dragon Lords. It's under all of the all the iterations of the High Tower, which means it's a Dawn Age thing. And so this is a big clue that Dragon Lords came to Westeros in ancient day. The Maesters wonder if it had been the Valyrians, but they kind of struggle with that because this is really before the Valyrian Empire, and so they just sort of shrug their shoulders and move on. But point is, Dragon Lords came to Oldtown, and really this is, when we're looking at it, invading Westeros in a nefarious way. This is probably the Bloodstone Emperor. Euron is a Bloodstone Emperor parallel with his blood eye and his Azor Ahai dreams of grandeur, and so here he is attacking Oldtown. So this is kind of a repeated pattern. Even that guy, Samwell Starfire Dane, Starfire makes you think of meteors, meteor swords like Dawn. You know, it sounds like an Azor Ahai kind of character. So.
The next parallel who's interesting and makes sense is the Red Kraken Dalton Greyjoy. And he set himself up, he attacked during the Dance of the Dragons, and is really kind of an Azor Ahai figure, as well as a parallel to Euron. His sword is named Nightfall. Like
Long Nightfall.
Long Nightfall. And the red nickname comes from the fact that he's, blood drenched because he's got 12 wounds, which we know is a very symbolic number.
Yep. We're going to see it again in a second. We find Azor Ahai people with, last hero had a dozen companions. That's kind of where it comes from. So.
Right. Plus, he invaded Westeros not at Oldtown, but in the Reach, which is, where Oldtown is. So they're adjacent to each other, if not exactly the same. Interesting to me is this whole idea of like a red kraken. You've got the color red coming up with the Ironborn quite a bit, even in our next one.
Yeah, and that even reminds me of like the whole blood eye, sea of blood, Euron symbolism.
Yeah, so the other one is Euron Red Hand, and he consolidated the Ironborn kingships with blood magic, and his name kind of sounds like Euron as well. So here's a quote about that.
Hundreds came, amongst them the Salt Kings and Rock Kings of the 7 major isles, and even the Lonely Light. Yet scarcely had they gathered when Euron Red Hand loosed his axemen on them, and Naga's ribs ran red with blood. 13 kings died that day, and 100 priests and prophets.
So you've got these bloody krakens, which makes me think of the waves of night and moonblood symbolism, because the kraken is black. On the sigil, you have a black kraken who's drenched in blood. So you have this, the waves of blood over this night black.
Very
kraken.
cheerful guy, Euron. You can imagine what his living room looks like, his home decor. It's all red and black and super severe. Looks like Dave Navarro's bedchamber or something.
Yeah, super goth. He probably sleeps in like a velvet coffin or something.
Something like
Seems like he would.
That's a great call, actually. So Euron Red Hand, this guy is loaded up with symbolism. Interesting, so 13 kings died that day. So there's your 12. The last hero math is usually 12 plus 1, because the last hero had 12 companions and then himself to make 13. And so you've got this sacrifice of 13 people inside of Naga's ribs, but Naga's ribs are almost certainly weirwood of some kind. And so now this appears to be not maybe a literal weirwood sacrifice, but at least a parallel to the very important weirwood sacrifices that we see all through the books. And in Bran's vision, for example, and so, or suggested all through the books, I should say. There's not a ton of them, but we've got basically this guy named Red Hand. And remember, the weirwoods, their leaves are like bloody red hands. Mm-hmm. So Euron Red Hand is killing 13 people inside of basically a kind of weirwood circle. And that really sounds like some very important ritualistic, magical stuff. So again, not the literal sacrifice that they did here, but just the elements at play. You've got a weirwood circle, got 13 people dying in a sort of ritualistic way. You've got the suggestion of blood magic, somebody becoming king, and a guy named Euron. So that's what we've got there. It might be some foreshadowing for something. I don't know if Euron's going to do something with weirwoods, but there is a very significant old weirwood on the Isle of Ravens where the Pirate Lord ruled. It's got some purple moss on half of its face, which is cool, I guess.
Interesting.
It's a Valyrian weirwood tree. I don't know, but there could be some weirwood stuff coming. And if Euron becomes a Night King, he could be on a collision course with Bran, and so there could be an astral confrontation. If Euron is a failed Bloodraven pupil,
I can see that.
That would make a lot of sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Gotta have those pupils fighting each other.
And gotta have those pupils dilated with massive amounts of shade of the evening. Mm-hmm. Like Rhaegar from the Rhaegar show. Anyways.
Oh man, Euron's other eye is his smiling eye, which has all that summer symbolism, which is Bran. So he's the bloody eye, and Bran is the blue summer eye.
Yeah, that's actually, that's an interesting opposite. That totally is. So, and I the more I think about Euron, the more I tend to buy that failed Bloodraven people idea. So a little bonus question. We've gone over a lot of that Forsaken vision, and I'm sure everybody's read it. The point is clear. Euron has delusions of godhood. But there's a nice little tidbit in there, which is very open for debate, and that is Hands of White Fire Lady. So let's go ahead and read this quote here.
He saw the long ships of the Ironborn adrift and burning on a boiling blood-red sea. He saw his brother on the Iron Throne again, but Euron was no longer human. He seemed more squid than man, a monster fathered by a kraken of the deep, his face a mass of writhing tentacles. Beside him stood a shadow in a woman's form, long and tall and terrible, her hands alive with pale white fire. Dwarves capered for their amusement, male and female, naked and misshapen, locked in carnal embrace, biting and tearing at each other, as Euron and his mate laughed and laughed and laughed.
So there you go, a shadow in woman's form, long and tall and terrible, her hands alive with pale white fire. So you have some ideas, Paul.
Yeah, so the first thing I think of when I hear that is Galadriel from Fellowship of the Ring. So during the chapter called The Mirror of Galadriel, Frodo offers her the One Ring. And she says, "In place of a dark lord you will set up a queen, and I shall not be dark, but beautiful and terrible as the morning and the night, fair as the sea and the sun and the snow upon the mountain, dreadful as the storm and the lightning, stronger than the foundations of the earth. All shall love me and despair." She lifted up her hand, and from the ring that she wore there issued a great light that illuminated her alone and left all else dark. She stood before Frodo, seeming now tall beyond measurement and beautiful beyond enduring, terrible and worshipful.
That definitely seems like Martin is evoking that language for sure. So,
well, in context, the other thing that's interesting is that this is about the corruption of Galadriel, who represents like purity, protection from evil. The ring that she's wearing is one of the 3 rings of power that were given to the elves. And the ring she wears is called Nenya, which is the white ring. It's a ring made of mithril set of a stone of adamant. And that stone has the power to like prevent corruption and protects and shields from evil. So she's this character that represents like preserving and saving things from evil, from being corrupted by the dark, and yet she's being tempted to turn that purity into itself a form of oppression and corruption over others.
and so who does that sound like to you?
Sounds a lot like Dany being tempted to becoming a Night Queen character.
Right, and we've wondered if that's something that Euron intends, if he's intending to be a Night King. So your vote for Hands of Pale Fire Lady is Dany then?
It could be, definitely. I think it's an option to think about for sure.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah, that was a really good comparison, and yeah, I tend to agree that it's Dany.
I know you were jealous that she read the Galadriel. You love reading that book.
I do love that.
But, okay, so I like that comparison. Some of the other possibilities frequently thrown out are Melora Hightower, even though we know almost nothing about her. She's up with Lord Leighton consulting the Book of Spells, so she's potentially a sorceress, and she's a Hightower. We're waiting for the Hightowers to become important. They seem important but haven't done anything. And so maybe that's someone that Euron could see as a potential consort or a partner for blood magic or something like that.
And then obviously Cersei as well, potentially.
Cersei, right? We could, even though Euron is totally different on the show, it would make sense to see a Euron-Cersei alliance at some point, depending on how things shake out.
It could even be not a literal woman, but a metaphorical representation of an entity. Viserion is another one of the big theories that I've seen, that the Hands of White Fire Lady represents kind of a, metaphorical Viserion, because Viserion has pale flame.
He has the pale flame, right? And then another one I've seen is Melisandre,
Yes.
because there's a scene where it says, pale sorceress flames seem to play about her fingers. And so she actually has hands of pale fire. And talking about a shadow and terrible and all that stuff. I mean, obviously it could be Melisandre. Melisandre could be due for a falling out at the wall after she resurrects Jon. Jon might banish her, because if she sacrifices Shireen to raise Jon, then he might banish her, and maybe she ends up with Euron. So there's some geography in the way there, but the symbolism could fit. So leave a comment below with your guess as to who Hands of White Fire Lady is. So in conclusion, Euron is up to no good, and this more than anything is one of the biggest differences show to books.
Yeah, in the books, he seems like he's trying to invoke this like eldritch horror and become a god, and in the show, he's just like some guy.
I mean, he doesn't
That's
Just a rude pirate.
He's
he
just
doesn't
some
just
guy.
like to wear eyeliner and I don't know, pretend like he's Jack Sparrow.
His goal in life is to defeat Jaime Lannister.
He's a very much less charismatic Jack Sparrow.
Oh my God! If they could have replaced him with Johnny Depp, I would have been happy.
Yeah, so Book Euron's like climax is like trying to become a god and maybe letting the others in and becoming Night King. And like Show Euron is like bar fight on the beach with one, crippled Jamie. Awesome. That's almost the same thing. So yeah, Euron is one of those places where we're gonna see much different stuff from the books. Euron is obviously headed towards a big third act villain arc. He might take up the space of the Night King altogether if there isn't a Night King. Just his simple becoming a, magically one-upped demigod or whatever. So lots of exciting and terrifying things to come. I'm sure like half of your videos will be about Euron after 2 Out comes out.
And I also think there's potential that Euron just like accidentally helps the others along and then just gets killed.
Like a doormat.
Yeah.
Like I am the greatest. He just like just bites it all of a sudden. Yeah. I can see that.
I do really like the gibbering idiot in the corner idea now that you've said that. Like.
Say that just again. I do like that.
No, I do really like the whole, goes crazy and becomes a gibbering idiot in the corner. He opens the doorway to the abyss, and instead of becoming empowered and a god, he just ends up sobbing in the corner with, long hair and fingernails and...
Yeah, it basically he'll end up like Pyat Pri was, where he's just like, Pri.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be satisfying.
Yeah.
So, come on, George. Do it. All right, guys. Well, thanks a lot for watching. This has been, what was this, number 11? Yeah.
Number
Most
11.
anticipated plotline number 11.
Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure you like and subscribe to all 3 of our channels. Links in the description.
Yay.
Peace.
See you next time.
Bye.